The presenter of Pacific Beat on ABC Radio Australia, Bruce Hill, has been following the story and he's with us live now from Melbourne. Bruce, there's a fair bit of uncertainty as to exactly what's happened here.
Well, I do have to correct one thing that you said there. The Fiji military has in fact confirmed that copies of the Constitution excuse me, were in fact seized. What they're saying is that the actual printed bound copies were not burned. What was burned, however, were the galley proofs at the printer. These are the things that the printers use to make sure that the printed copies don't have any errors. These were in fact shredded, soaked in kerosene and set on fire in front of the chair of the Constitution Commission, Professor Yash Gai, a well-known international constitutional scholar whose job it was to head the Constitution Commission. He says that this was done deliberately to humiliate him. He said when he remonstrated with the police at the printers who were taking the copies away, the senior police officer in charge abused him, and that's when they shredded, soaked the copies of the galley proofs in kerosene and set fire to them. So a lot of people in Fiji think that the actual copies of the Constitution were set on fire. They weren't. They were, however, seized by the police, and the Land Forces Commander, Colonel Mosesi Tikoitonga, has confirmed that they are now at the Suva Police Headquarters.
Was that seizure legal?
Well, it depends who you talk to. According to the Land Forces Commander, and quite why this is coming from the military rather than the government, I'll have to leave it to you to work out why that is. It was Professor Yash Gai who was acting illegally. Colonel Tikoitonga claims that as soon as the actual formal handing over ceremony of the copy of the Constitution, the draft Constitution, to the President happened, then the Constitution Commission went out of existence legally, and that actually printing these copies was outside their powers, and that Professor Yash Gai was no longer chairman of anything. He had no right to have these copies printed. Professor Yash Gai insists that no, it was completely legal. He says the Constitution Commission was completely independent legally, and they were acting under the decree. So Professor Yash Gai, well-known international constitutional scholar, says it was legal to print them, and the Land Forces Commander of the Republic of Fiji Military Forces says no, it wasn't. So you decide for yourself who's right.
The Army is saying that Yash Gai has been playing to the NGOs and that they've had undue influence on his drafting of this Constitution. What particularly is the Army concerned about?
Well, there's the ostensible reason, and then there's potentially real reason. What has happened is there's been a wide-ranging consultation with lots of different individuals, groups, political parties, trade unions, women's groups, church groups, individuals as well. They've all been encouraged to put in their submissions to the Constitution Commission. And what Professor Gai was trying to do with printing these copies was to distribute them to the various people that had been part of the Constitution Commission's work, so that they could actually see the results of their work. I think what the military was saying was that these groups are not society. Colonel Tikoitonga was said out in the villages, a lot of Itauke, a lot of indigenous Fijians don't even want there to be an election at all. They're quite happy with the way things are going. And so he says that perhaps the people who took part in this process were getting undue influence, but it was a completely open process and anyone could have actually participated if they'd wanted. One of the things that's been speculated on as to why the Army is not very happy about this is that it does contain a provision in, and their attempts to suppress it haven't actually worked. Electronic copies are out all over the place. Here's one here. Everyone's got them. They're on anti-government websites and they've been sent out by email. But it does contain provisions that 6 months before the supposed democratic elections in 2014, the interim government has to step down and it's replaced by a transitional council of senior public servants who will run the country in a neutral way so that the current coup-installed military government's candidates don't get an unfair advantage. You'd have to say if you were the Army that was behind this coup, that wouldn't really appeal.
Right, Bruce Hill from Pacific Beat on ABC Radio Australia. Thanks for joining us. The United States is now going to tumble over its fiscal cliff. Congress is not going to make the midnight deadline to pass legislation which would avoid tax hikes and big spending cuts. Republicans and Democrats say a deal is very close. An agreement has been reached on raising taxes for those earning over $400,000 a year. But a final deal hasn't been crafted, and now the Republican-led House says it won't be voting on anything today. The US President Barack Obama admits it's not the way he likes to see politics conducted.
I have to say that ever since I took office, throughout the campaign, and over the last couple of months, my preference would have been to solve all these problems in the context of a larger agreement, a bigger deal, a grand bargain, whatever you want to call it, that solves our deficit problems in a balanced and responsible way, that doesn't just deal with the taxes, but deals with the spending in a balanced way so that we can put all this behind us and just focusing on growing our economy. But with this Congress, that was obviously a little too much to hope for at this time. It may be we can do it in stages. We're going to solve this problem instead in several steps. Last year, in 2011, we started reducing the deficit through $1 trillion in spending cuts. Those have already taken place. The agreement being worked on right now would further reduce the deficit by asking the wealthiest 2% of Americans to pay higher taxes for the first time in 2 decades. So that would add additional hundreds of billions of dollars to deficit reduction. What we also have facing us starting tomorrow are automatic spending cuts that are scheduled to go into effect. And keep in mind that some of these spending cuts that Congress has said will automatically go into effect have an impact on our Defense Department, but they also have an impact on things like Head Start. And so there are some programs that are scheduled to be cut that we're using an axe instead of a scalpel.
Barack Obama there, and the Republican Senate leader Mitch McConnell says it's crucial both sides come to an agreement.
We need to protect American families and job creators from this looming tax hike. Everyone agrees that that action is necessary. And I can report that we've reached an agreement on all of the tax issues. We are very, very close. As the President just said, the most important piece, the piece that has to be done now, is preventing the tax hikes.